Welcome to your Essential Business Briefing. I'm Kate Moody. Coming up, could a basic income slow the spread of the coronavirus? We speak to the UN Development Program about its plan to protect nearly 3 billion people around the world. Is a pandemic the ideal moment to start a new business? French entrepreneurs are jumping into a rapidly changing landscape. And as Lebanon's economy crumbles, our reporters go behind the scenes in the thriving black market of currency exchange. As the coronavirus pandemic sweeps the globe, governments are spending billions of dollars to support economies, businesses, and workers. But many people, especially in developing economies, are falling through the cracks. The United Nations Development Program has launched an appeal for a temporary basic income, a minimum payment that would allow more people to stay at home, even if they usually make their living in an informal sector. The idea is to slow the spread of the virus and support the world's most vulnerable population. Well, we can speak now to George Gray Molina, chief economist at the UN Development Program and lead author of this report. Thanks for being with us on People and Profit. Explain to us, if you will, how a temporary basic income would work in the current context.
Thank you so much, Kate. As we know, the virus is accelerating to the largest development countries right now, hitting Brazil, Mexico, South Africa, India, Pakistan, Bangladesh. And unlike the richest countries in the world that have work furlough programs or unemployment insurance programs, most countries do not have anything similar. So we rely on cash transfers, and that's where a temporary basic income, we believe, is essential in a moment in which the economic recession and the health crisis are intertwined and accelerating in the developing world.
We're hearing a lot about governments unleashing billions of dollars for stimulus programs. How does this proposal really stand out and differ from those relatively generous stimulus proposals that we've heard around the world?
Yes, we've done a costing exercise on basic incomes, and this would cost about $200 billion a month for a 6-month period. That's about $1.2 trillion. And that's about 10% of what the G20 countries are using in their fiscal and financial repurposing. We know that most developing countries are already mobilizing between 1% and 3% of their GDPs. This proposal hovers around 0.9 of 1% of GDP for developing countries. So we think it's within reach, but it would create a minimum floor, a guaranteed income for the poorest and most vulnerable citizens.
And talk us through how governments should pay for this. Where is the money going to come from to make this a financially viable option?
We've looked at 3 pockets of resources. This, of course, should not be financed through new taxes because it's a temporary measure. It would last for 3 months or 6 months or 9 months or the duration of the crisis. The first pocket of resources is, of course, repurposing existing expenditures and start with fossil fuel subsidies, start with military expenditures. They sum up a large amount in developing and emerging economies today. A second pocket, of course, is debt standstill and external debt. We know that the G20 has called for a debt standstill for the poorest economies in the world. The Secretary General has called for a comprehensive debt standstill, and that amounts to $3.1 trillion this year in money that developing countries owe to creditors. If there's a 12-month moratorium, we could pay a TBI 3 times without amount of money. And the third pocket of resources is, of course, that this self-pays itself because it circulates into the local economy with a multiplier effect, and it's recouped through direct and indirect taxes over time.
Are any countries already testing this out on a temporary basis?
Yes, we found some very exciting and interesting programs. So I talk about Colombia and the Ingreso Solidario proposal, in which they've reached 138 of the poorest municipalities through something very similar to a TBI. We've seen in Togo, in Africa, the extension of their existing social coverage program to 12% of the population in just 2 months through digital means, digital self-registration, and using digital payment systems. So we're seeing many cases around the world. 133 countries have topped up their social protection systems over the past 3 months. So we know that that's happening, but we also see that that's probably insufficient if it doesn't cover all people in the informal sector, the self-employed, the people who provide unpaid care work in the developing world.
In developing economies, the UN says as many as 9 out of 10 workers depend on informal markets to make a living. Do you see that changing at all after the pandemic?
Well, unfortunately, during the pandemic, what we've seen is more informalization. And we've seen people getting up in the morning and going to the market and selling their goods and being exposed to the virus. And that's how it's spreading at such an accelerated pace right now. What we do think is that we require some economic incentives in the short run in order to control the pandemic, but we'll also have to think about more structural issues as we move into the future. So what are those structural issues? They have to do with the pace at which developing economies diversify their economies away from oil, away from commodities, and start to create a knowledge-based economy that has new sources of productivity that focus on a green recovery, a digital sector. These are already happening in pockets in different parts of Asia, Africa, and Latin America, but it's a major challenge for the next 10 or 15 years.
Now, the UN has warned that millions of people could be plunged into extreme poverty during this pandemic. Why are we seeing so much inequality now, and is it being addressed?
I think that's a very important question. The root cause of this, of course, is inequality in incomes and inequality in opportunities. The projections are quite dismal. Between 100 million and 250 million people could fall back into poverty. And you have to add the 750 million who are already under the extreme poverty line. So that's a mass amount of people. The conditions for which income generation happens for the poorest at the bottom of the pyramid are not there right now and won't be there during the pandemic, because we're precisely trying to stall and to put a pause button, if you will, on the developing economies. So we're caught in this catch-22, which we need the right incentives for social distancing, for wearing masks, for hand washing, and also for staying home. And we're currently missing that. And we think the basic income, a temporary basic income, is not a silver bullet, but is part and parcel of that toolkit.
All right, George Gray Molina of the UN Development Program, thanks so much for joining us on France 24. Next, France is facing an unprecedented recession in 2020, and many businesses risk falling into bankruptcy. But that hasn't prevented budding entrepreneurs from going to work. The number of companies being launched since lockdown measures were eased has jumped. James Wilson reports.
Running his own restaurant was always Pierre's dream, and he had originally planned to open in March. Then the pandemic hit and turned his plans upside down.
C'était beaucoup de stress. On n'a pas renoncé. Notre but, c'était d'ouvrir à tout point, quoi. Le but, c'était de payer nos échéances comme on avait déjà.
He finally opened on the 28th of June, but it's been far from an easy start. New hygiene and social distancing rules have completely changed the way restaurants in France operate. But the most important thing is that there are still customers who want to eat out.
S'il vous plaît.
And Pierre is certainly not alone. While the number of people starting a new business in France plummeted during lockdown to only 34,000 in April, by June the figures had doubled. Over 75,000 people set up new enterprises last month, even more than this time last year. And one of them was hairdresser Ivy. Before lockdown, he had already invested thousands in his company and was relieved to open the doors in June. But the business is not yet profitable. On average, he gets 40 customers a day, but he needs another 10 more to break even. Still, he's optimistic.
Je pense qu'on est dans un flot moyen. On peut faire beaucoup mieux. On connaît la ville, on habite ici depuis tout jeune, donc on sait à peu près le potentiel de chaque commerce. On peut faire beaucoup mieux. On n'est pas à plaindre, on a quand même du monde.
One thing, however, that all entrepreneurs are hoping for is that a second lockdown can be avoided.
Lebanon is in turmoil. The pandemic has worsened an already deep economic crisis, leaving millions of people struggling to buy food and basic supplies. The value of the Lebanese lira has plunged by 80%, and the black market for foreign currency is booming. Our reporters in Beirut got a rare inside look.
Stacks of foreign currency, security cameras rolling, and a Kalashnikov at the ready. Business is brisk at Mohammed's Bureau de Change in South Beirut. Lebanon's economy is teetering on the edge. Its currency, the lira, was pegged to the US dollar for 2 decades, but its value has plummeted by 80% in a few months. Now the dollar reigns supreme, spiralling in value amid unprecedented instability. After a succession of crises, authorities restricted dollar withdrawal rules and tried to impose official exchange rates. But nothing has stopped people turning to the parallel market. Illicit money trading has become the norm.
It's almost 50% less than what I would get on the black market, and I think every Lebanese citizen is trying to get as much as they can from what they have saved on the side, as they have lost already so much.
We're back in South Beirut, an area controlled by Hezbollah. The powerful pro-Iranian group is accused of profiting from the black market, a charge they vehemently deny. Mohammed, the currency trader and Hezbollah supporter, denounces a widely entrenched system.
Of course, the black market controls all the prices. The black market controls everything.
He was recently detained in a crackdown before being released and considers himself and other moneylenders to be scapegoats.
I spent 18 days in prison, accused of trying to speculate and devalue the currency. They said it was our fault the price of the dollar was going up. They interrogated all the money changers, so we told them, my friend, we just follow the prices on the market.
Lebanon is one of the worst hit countries in the world in terms of hyperinflation, along with Venezuela and Zimbabwe. And the almost daily fluctuations of its currency on the black market continue to shape the lives of millions of Lebanese people.
Well, that's all for now, but don't forget you can get in touch with the team on Facebook or Twitter. Until next time, thanks for watching.